They say the people we trust the most often hide the darkest secrets. In this chilling story, a respected pastor, a loving mother, and two innocent daughters are at the center of an unspeakable betrayal, one that ends in unimaginable tragedy. What happens when the shepherd of the flock becomes the wolf in disguise? In this tale of deceit, abuse, and vengeance, we'll uncover how blind faith can shatter families and entire communities. This story is a heartbreaking reminder of the lengths a mother will go to protect her children, and the dark truths we often ignore when they're hidden behind a pulpit. Before we unravel this disturbing tale, like and subscribe to Crime Chronicles for more stories that expose the darkest corners of human behavior. Pastor Anthony Richardson, 41, stood as the embodiment of spiritual leadership in the tight-knit community of Jackson, Mississippi. With his powerful sermons and unwavering charisma, Anthony had built not only a thriving congregation at Grace of Light Baptist Church but also an image of a devoted family man. His wife, Renee Richardson, 39, was the epitome of grace and poise, seamlessly balancing her roles as a mother, a supportive wife, and the church's first lady. Together, they were seen as the golden couple, the ideal example of faith in action. Their two daughters, Michaela, 12, and Trinity, 10, were raised in an environment steeped in devotion and discipline. Sundays were spent in prayer and worship, while weeknights often involved church events or family Bible studies. Michaela, a talented singer in the church choir, was beginning to attract attention for her angelic voice, while Trinity, the youngest, enjoyed helping in Sunday school and was often referred to as Pastor Anthony's little helper. Their home was filled with the sights and sounds of what appeared to be a picture-perfect life. Gospel music echoed through the halls as Renee prepared meals in their tidy kitchen. Family dinners were a sacred tradition, with Anthony leading the table in prayer before every meal. To outsiders, the Richardson family seemed untouchable, a beacon of faith and unity in a world full of chaos. However, beneath the polished exterior, subtle cracks began to show. Anthony's sermons, once inspiring and uplifting, had taken on a more authoritarian tone. He often spoke about obedience, especially within the family unit, and frequently used scripture to emphasize the importance of submission. At home, his charismatic persona gave way to a controlling presence. He dictated how the household was run, from what Renee should wear to how Michaela and Trinity spent their free time. Renee, though admired by many, had begun to feel the weight of her husband's expectations. As the First Lady, she was expected to uphold the family's flawless image, even when Anthony's demands became suffocating. Friends at the church would occasionally notice Renee's forced smiles during social gatherings, but none dared to question the man they viewed as their spiritual guide. Michaela, in particular, bore the brunt of Anthony's attention. As she blossomed into a young girl, her father's praise often felt more intense than a simple expression of pride. He frequently commented on her appearance, encouraged her to spend more time with him in his office, and demanded she stay close to home, citing the dangers of the outside world. Michaela, torn between her love for her father and an instinctual discomfort, kept quiet, afraid of disrupting the family's delicate balance. Trinity, still innocent, remained oblivious to the tension brewing in her home. She saw her father as a hero, her mother as a role model, and her older sister as her best friend. But even Trinity occasionally noticed the hushed arguments between her parents late at night or the way Michaela would avoid her father's gaze. The congregation of Grace of Light Baptist Church adored the Richardson family, but behind closed doors, their lives were far from idyllic. The pressures of maintaining their spotless reputation weighed heavily on them all, creating a simmering tension that would soon reach its breaking point. In the heart of Jackson, the Richardson family stood as a shining example of faith and unity, but in reality, they were living a carefully curated lie, one that was destined to unravel in the most horrific way imaginable. The Richardson household, known for its warmth and spiritual devotion, hid a growing darkness beneath its polished exterior. Over the years, Anthony Richardson's relationship with his eldest daughter, Michaela, had evolved in ways that blurred the lines between parental affection and something far more insidious. It began subtly, with Anthony offering Michaela extra attention under the guise of nurturing her talents and guiding her spiritual journey. He would spend long hours with her in his home office, counseling her on her future and reminding her of her special place within the family. "You're my shining star," he often told her, words that initially filled Michaela with pride but soon took on a chilling undertone. As Michaela grew, Anthony's behavior shifted. He became more possessive, insisting that she dress modestly because she had matured faster than her age, even within the confines of their own home. He discouraged her from forming close friendships outside of church, claiming he needed to protect her from worldly influences. Michaela, desperate to please her father and unaware of his true intentions, complied without question. Anthony's grooming tactics became more calculated over time. He often framed his actions as part of his role as a father and spiritual leader, telling Michaela that their bond was a testament to her faith and obedience. "God has given you a special purpose," he would say, intertwining his manipulative behavior with religious justification. Michaela, young and impressionable, felt trapped in a web of confusion, unable to distinguish her father's love from his growing obsession. The emotional toll on Michaela was immense. She began to withdraw from her peers at school and church, isolating herself out of fear and shame. Her once bright demeanor dimmed, replaced by a quiet sadness that only her younger sister, Trinity, seemed to notice. But whenever Trinity asked if something was wrong, Michaela would force a smile and assure her that everything was fine. Michaela's inner turmoil deepened as she struggled to reconcile her father's actions with the man she had always admired. She felt an overwhelming sense of guilt, as if she were complicit in something she didn't fully understand. Anthony's manipulation left her feeling powerless and voiceless, unable to share her pain with anyone, not even her mother. Meanwhile, subtle changes in family dynamics began to surface. Renee noticed Michaela's growing distance but attributed it to the challenges of teenage life. She also observed Anthony's increasing strictness with Michaela, but she rationalized his behavior as a father's protective instincts. Whenever Renee tried to discuss her concerns with Anthony, he would dismiss her worries, reminding her of his role as the head of the household. "Don't question my methods, Renee," he would say with an air of authority. "I'm doing what's best for our family." Renee, conditioned by years of deferring to Anthony's leadership, brushed aside her instincts, convincing herself that everything was under control. Yet, small moments, Michaela flinching at her father's touch, her sudden disinterest in choir practice, and her avoidance of eye contact, gnawed at Renee's subconscious. Unbeknownst to the rest of the family, Michaela carried the weight of a terrible secret, one that threatened to shatter the Richardson household and expose the devastating truth about the man who had built his life on a foundation of faith and deception. As the days turned into weeks, the cracks in their seemingly perfect family grew wider, setting the stage for a revelation that would send shockwaves through their lives and the entire community of Grace of Light Baptist Church. The change in Michaela was impossible to ignore. Over the course of a few months, Renee began to notice her daughter's sudden weight gain and unexplained mood swings. Michaela, once bubbly and full of life, now seemed withdrawn, her eyes hollow and tired. She barely touched her meals, and when Renee tried to talk to her, Michaela would either remain silent or force a smile, assuring her mother that everything was fine. But Renee knew better. As a mother, she had always been in tune with her children's emotions, and something was deeply wrong. She observed Michaela's body language, her reluctance to participate in family activities, and the way she flinched when touched. There was a palpable tension between Michaela and Anthony, one that had never existed before. Renee tried to push aside her suspicions, convincing herself that Michaela was simply struggling with the pressures of adolescence. But then, the breaking point came one late evening when Renee walked into Michaela's room, finding her daughter hunched over the edge of her bed, her body trembling with silent sobs. The sight was enough to shatter Renee's heart. She knelt beside Michaela, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Sweetheart, please talk to me," she whispered, her voice thick with concern. "What's going on?" Michaela resisted at first, her tears falling harder, as if she had been holding this pain in for far too long. But in the safety of her mother's arms, she finally broke. With her voice barely above a whisper, Michaela confessed everything: the manipulation, the control, and the horrors she had endured at the hands of her father. She spoke of the long, twisted relationship that had begun under the guise of fatherly love, and how Anthony had crossed lines that no father ever should. Michaela's words tumbled out in a flood of guilt and shame as she recounted the abuse, each detail more devastating than the last. Renee's heart shattered as she listened to the unspeakable truth about the man she had loved and trusted for so many years. The weight of Michaela's confession crushed her, and she couldn't comprehend what she was hearing. The man she had married, the preacher she had supported and believed in, had betrayed them in the most grotesque way possible. The room seemed to spin as Renee fought back tears, her mind racing with disbelief and horror. For the first time in years, she looked at Anthony, not as her husband, but as the monster Michaela had revealed him to be. Fueled by anger and fear for her daughter's safety, Renee stormed into the living room, where Anthony sat casually flipping through the Bible, unaware of the devastation unfolding upstairs. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaos brewing in Renee's mind. "You need to explain yourself, Anthony," Renee's voice trembled, but there was a cold fury behind her words. "You need to tell me the truth right now." Anthony looked up, his expression unreadable. He knew the tone in Renee's voice, he had seen it before when things were amiss. But he didn't panic. Instead, he sat back, folding his arms over his chest. "What's this about, Renee?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Renee's hands shook as she spoke, her voice rising in intensity. "Michaela just told me everything. The truth about what you've done to her." "How long, Anthony? How long did you think you could get away with this?" Anthony's face darkened, but his response was chilling in its deflection. "You don't understand, Renee," he said, his voice smooth and authoritative. "This is not what you think it is. Michaela was being rebellious, and I had to guide her back on the righteous path. This is about discipline, about keeping her pure and focused on what's important." His words were an attempt to justify the unthinkable. Anthony stood up, his posture straightening as he started to quote scripture, twisting the holy words to fit his sick narrative. "The Bible says that a father must protect his children, guide them, correct them when they stray. I was doing what was necessary for her soul. You should be thanking me, not condemning me." Renee recoiled, stunned by the audacity and arrogance in his voice. His attempt to hide behind religion, to manipulate the very scriptures he preached, only deepened the disgust she felt for him. "You're sick, Anthony," she spat, her voice quivering with rage. "You used your position as a preacher to abuse your own daughter. You twisted everything, her trust, your family, everything we built. You took it all and turned it into something monstrous." But Anthony, cold and composed, did not flinch. "You don't understand. Michaela is lost. I had to save her. I had to do what was necessary. Don't you see? I was trying to help her grow stronger in her faith." In that moment, Renee knew that the man she had married, the father of her children, was beyond saving. He was a predator disguised as a preacher, and his twisted justifications would never erase the damage he had done. Her heart broke not just for Michaela, but for the realization that her entire life with Anthony had been built on lies. He had used their faith, their love, and their trust to feed his dark desires, and now, that truth would destroy them all. As the weight of his betrayal crushed her, Renee knew there was only one thing left to do: protect Michaela, and expose Anthony for the monster he truly was. Renee had made up her mind. She could no longer live with the man who had destroyed her family, who had taken everything sacred and twisted it beyond recognition. She knew she had to protect her daughters at all costs, and that meant getting them as far away from Anthony as possible. In the dead of night, she began to secretly pack their bags, organizing the essentials: clothes, identification, anything that would help them escape the life they had known. Michaela and Trinity were unaware of the plans at first, but the weight of Renee's decision bore down on her with every passing minute. However, Anthony was not as oblivious as Renee had hoped. His keen instincts, manipulative, controlling, had kept him one step ahead. He noticed the subtle changes in his wife's behavior, the nervous glances, the way she began to avoid him more frequently. One evening, after church service, he confronted Renee in their bedroom, his voice calm but laced with an underlying menace. "What are you planning, Renee?" Anthony's cold, calculating tone sent a chill down her spine. "You think you can leave me? You think you can tear apart our family just like that?" Renee froze, fear bubbling to the surface. But it wasn't fear for herself that gripped her now. It was fear for her daughters, knowing that Anthony would stop at nothing to maintain his control over them, to keep them in his twisted grasp. She couldn't let that happen. "You need to leave, Anthony," Renee said, her voice steady, though her hands shook. "You've done enough damage. I'm taking Michaela and Trinity, and we're leaving." Anthony's face twisted in fury, his eyes narrowing as rage flared within him. "Leave me," he spat. "You think you can just walk away from everything we've built? You think I'll let you tear apart the family I've worked so hard to protect?" Without warning, he lunged toward her, grabbing her by the arms with such force that she was nearly thrown off balance. "I'll make sure you regret this, Renee. You and those girls will never have peace again," he hissed, his breath hot and rancid against her face. Renee fought back the terror rising within her, but as she struggled against him, she realized that the man she had once loved was beyond reason. He was a ticking time bomb, and he would stop at nothing to maintain his power. She had no choice but to act, swiftly, decisively. In that moment of desperation, Renee's gaze landed on the kitchen knife she had used earlier that evening to prepare dinner. It was a heavy knife, its blade glinting in the dim light, a symbol of the final, brutal choice she now had to make. Without a second thought, she wrenched free from Anthony's grasp and rushed toward the knife. Anthony's fury turned into a dark, predatory smile as he moved toward her, but it was too late. Renee, shaking but resolute, swung the blade with all her might, slashing at him in a frenzy. The first cut caught him in the arm, but he barely flinched. His fury only grew as he advanced on her, his eyes wild with rage. But Renee wasn't going to stop. She wasn't going to let him destroy her family any longer. With every ounce of strength she could muster, she stabbed Anthony again, the knife sinking deep into his chest. Blood splattered across the floor and walls, staining the white tile in a gruesome mess. His mouth opened in a gurgled scream, but it was too late. The knife found its mark again, and again, as Renee, fueled by a primal instinct to protect her daughters, delivered blow after blow, each one sinking deeper into his flesh. Finally, with one last desperate stab, Anthony collapsed to the floor, his life draining from him in a pool of his own blood. The room was silent except for Renee's heavy breathing, her hands trembling as she dropped the bloody knife to the floor. The body of the man she had once loved now lay lifeless in a pool of crimson. Michaela and Trinity had heard the chaos from the other room. They had been hiding in the hallway, too frightened to intervene, too overwhelmed by the violence erupting in their home. But now, they stood frozen in the doorway, their eyes wide in shock, their hearts pounding with fear. Renee turned toward them, her face pale, her clothes drenched in her husband's blood. The sight was overwhelming, terrifying, and yet she knew it was the only way to protect them. "It's over," she whispered, her voice shaky but firm. "We're safe now." But as Michaela and Trinity looked at the bloodied body of their father on the floor, their lives were irrevocably changed. They had witnessed something no child should ever see, something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. She then called 911. Her voice, steady but full of anguish, echoed in the phone's receiver as she reported the murder. "I had to do it. I had to protect them." As the police arrived, Renee sat on the floor, her hands covered in her husband's blood, and surrendered quietly. The officers handcuffed her, offering no words of comfort. Michaela and Trinity were taken into custody by Child Services, their eyes wide with shock, unable to fully comprehend the events that had just destroyed their family. The case of Pastor Anthony Richardson's murder quickly became a media sensation, capturing the attention of not just Jackson, Mississippi, but the entire nation. The brutal killing of a beloved preacher by his wife sent shockwaves through the community. Public opinion was divided. Some saw Renee as a heroic mother who had finally taken a stand against her husband's abuse, while others viewed her as a cold-blooded murderer who should have sought help rather than resorting to violence. As the case unfolded, news outlets clung to every detail, with the media portraying Renee as a tragic figure caught in a web of control, manipulation, and fear. In the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Renee's defense team argued that she had acted out of desperation to protect her children from years of abuse at the hands of her husband. They painted her as a woman who had been pushed to the edge by Anthony's unchecked power and dominance within their home and their church. The defense called expert witnesses who testified about the psychological trauma Anthony's manipulative behavior had inflicted on Renee and their daughters. However, the prosecution had a different. They painted Renee as a woman who had crossed a line, taking matters into her own hands in a premeditated act of violence. As the trial continued, more victims from Anthony's congregation came forward, exposing his long history of manipulation and exploitation. Former church members and employees shared their stories of how Anthony had used his influence to take advantage of vulnerable women and children in his community. The revelation that this was not an isolated incident but part of a larger pattern of abuse left the jury with an even harder decision to make. When the jury finally reached a verdict, the room was filled with tension. They found Renee guilty of manslaughter, not murder, acknowledging that while her actions were extreme, they were born from a place of maternal instinct and years of torment. The judge handed down a sentence of 15 years in prison, a decision that left many in the courtroom conflicted. Was she a victim who had been pushed too far, or was she a woman who had taken justice into her own hands? As the gavel came down, the audience was left grappling with complex moral questions. Renee had fought for her children, but at what cost? And what would become of Michaela and Trinity now, as they were left to rebuild their lives after the unspeakable tragedy that had torn their family apart? This case wasn't just about one family's tragedy. It was a mirror held up to society, forcing us to confront how power, faith, and silence can enable the unthinkable. Renee's story, while horrifying, is a testament to the strength of a mother's love and the consequences of turning a blind eye to those we trust the most. Do you believe Renee's actions were justified, or should she have handled the situation differently? Where do we draw the line between justice and vengeance? If this story shocked you, like and subscribe to Crime Chronicles for more tales that delve into the darkest corners of betrayal and human behavior.